evening, everyone! Welcome to what may be the final disc guidance stream for Street Fighter V, anyway. But as of now, there's still a chance we'll get one or two more bots from various places. Today we are looking at Lootbot. And we have not released a prototype for this bot so far, nor do we plan to, given that the inputs turn out to be a lot more complicated than we were expecting initially. But you can expect our usual insights and explanations of how to use bots, input things. They're complex, but not necessarily that difficult, thankfully. And the reasons, of course, why we built the bot the way we did, as well as some very short, in this case, opinions on use of the CPU as a counterpart to the bot, especially if you have trouble with certain of the inputs. This stream is probably going to be relatively shorter as he doesn't have a whole lot of things that we need to cover. For once we have a bot that does not use any variations in V skill and V trigger. Basically, the V system for this bot isn't what we've been seeing lately, with it working with both V skills or V triggers. It's not that it doesn't work, it's that this doesn't seem to have any point. So, of course, we'll be showing off the bot itself, as you can watch it now, just watching how it generally performs. You can use this part of the stream as quick reference for if things are looking right when you input it yourself. Then, as mentioned, some brief discussion of the CPU, and then straight into the inputs, before trailing off with probably quite a long explanation as to why we designed it the way we did, and what we think is useful for dealing with the character, especially so that you can tell us that we're wrong and let us build a new bot. Ooh, barely missed. So Loot was given a lot of health and a lot of stun. A very aggressive character, but with no command grab, meaning that mostly he's actually played very precisely, let's say. He has at least one armored move and a lot of good options, but they're almost all offensive. And while he does have good strong punishes when he has meter or specific situations, if you pressure him down hard enough, he might not be able to get a lot out of it. It's partially because of this fact, the general having to be aggressive, not having a lot of plus moves without some setup or some charge up or any number of other things, and having only kind of decent neutral, that we ended up not liking the effects of the CPU very much. If you're not familiar with how the computer version of these characters plays, even at level 7, they mostly defeat you by reading your inputs beforehand so that they know how to counter them. For example, basically teching your throws most of the time, even in situations where they would otherwise have normally been defending, or rather a player might have been defending, and defending in a way that probably wouldn't have led to the throw tech. He also has some relatively deceptive ranges on both normals and specials, and despite the fact that they have relatively long startup, this allows the CPU to check you and mess with you quite a lot. But he does seem to somehow be lacking, let's call it accuracy. His aim isn't so great, particularly with characters who have evasive hurt boxes, who are small, or just move in non-standard ways. Cammy is just on the borderline of that, so you're probably going to see some of that in a moment. Players are more likely to be conservative as a result of this, and you're going to be looking for ways to get more damage that the CPU will let you get away with while checking you and stopping you from a bunch of other stuff that you technically should use. So our opinion so far on using the CPU for this bot is that you should technically just avoid it. We did manage to get nearly every move that Luke does into the bot, and almost all of Luke's setups are basically 50-50. You are guessing. Once you have gotten into that situation, your opponent is in control, which means that you could learn how they work and maybe your character has a special way out of it. But since Luke's stuff isn't usually about resets, and he does have invincible uppercuts, you're mostly just going to have to take whatever he dishes out. This is compounded by the fact that his high health and high stun mean that players are gonna be more likely to do this. The one thing we would suggest maybe using the CPU for is if you find that you really need personal experience with his V trigger 2. Not even his V skill 1, because you can totally switch the bot to V skill 1 and it will function, it just isn't optimized for that choice of V skill. So let's change to the CPU for a moment to demonstrate briefly why all of this was the conclusion we came to. It can be a little bit hard to understand this at first because he mostly looks the same at first. He just does things and gives you the impression, well, I shouldn't do certain other things myself. But all of the pressure that this character uses is functionally reactable in different ways and can be learned through the bot a little bit easier than it can through the CPU because of where the gaps in movement are. So let's look from the perspective mostly of accuracy problems. If you don't give the bot an opening, if you don't give the CPU an opening, it generally doesn't do anything. Nothing of serious intent, it's just moving back and forth and hoping you eventually make a mistake. But, believe it or not, most of this isn't even safe. It's just safe enough that you can get away with doing it. But you can generally check these sorts of things, and if your character again has nearly any way to evade Sandblaster, his projectile, or that, you're not in that much of a threat situation most of the time. So Cammy can quite often just use Spin Knuckle and he'll just block. Or he'll do something like that, where a player might have managed this, and you definitely do have to worry about this happening, but this is just a general concept. He's just going to do things and more or less prevent you from getting to hit any buttons, because while he can get away with this all of the time, it's not necessarily a good idea for him to try. Invincible moves do massive damage to him, and you can just play very slow neutral footsies and win with more than half the characters in the game pretty much the entire time. This is compounded by the way his V system works. When he does damage to you, his V meter goes up. When you do damage to him, it goes down. So really, even once he has V meter, it's not in his best interest to necessarily start taking risks. He'd manage most of the time to extend it as long as possible by first getting the V cancel, which the bot mostly doesn't do well. And the CPU does even worse. And from there, just playing semi-defensively and hoping that you mess up enough for damage to happen from Luke's side. So part of the reason why we say that this is not as helpful is simply that you could learn to stop all of these moves in more realistic situations, because the CPU, whether you can tell easily or not, is doing all of these things at precisely the range where you can't counter them. Which is great, but doesn't teach you how to deal with people who are less perfect than CPUs. And that can be really important against this type of character. But the main thing it is meant to help you understand is the one thing that you can't get from here. There are various points where you're going to need to learn how to counter loop and make sure that you've confirmed your combo. But as you can see here, it's usually either that you definitely got the combo because there was no way otherwise, or the CPU read your input and therefore you got blocked or missed. There isn't a lot of hit confirming going on against this. It works if you are still training your own timing on punishes, but again, something you could do against the bot, and if you don't think that you're doing that cleanly because the bot is somewhat more aggressive than the CPU obviously, then you can take a crack at the CPU side to see if it works out most of the time. But unlike many bots where we tell you explicitly, switch between the two, see what it feels like, or try to get a different type of experience from there, this isn't that. So instead, we're now going to go into concepts relative to the point system and inputs. The point system of the bot is pretty simple. Your main goal is generally to land hits and hit confirm those hits based on the gaps in Luke's attack strings. Usually, with the implementation we've got right now, he'll block long enough that if you go for it and get it wrong, then you will get blocked properly. But he is very aggressive as a character, as a bot. You can work more defensive play into him, but it's not necessarily helpful because the thing you're training isn't how often does this character actually block my stuff. And the better you get at dealing with it, the faster you're going to be able to get your moves off. Another important thing is your own V-shift. Luke has a lot of situations where your best bet is to V-shift yourself out of what is probably pressure. This is particularly true when he's using his V-Skill 2 because if he gets a big enough advantage or just a good spacing, his V-Skill 2 is throw invincible, and once he uses it to evade a throw, he can combo off of it. Depending on your fidelity of inputs, he will jump more or less. And this also is affected by how well you're playing in general. If you get him on a good timing, he'll jump more often. And if you're not playing terribly well, with most inputs he won't jump that often. Which is good because the bot ends up not being as simple this way. He will still jump, but you have to figure out those very, very seldom times where he actually does it. And of course, you can crush counter for a point as just a standard thing. as far as we know, with most of the ways that you could input the bot, he's not going to end up just spamming uppercut. In fact, you should see it fairly seldom. We've decided against making it a point or even much of a focus to learn to punish either his rolling kick or the close range sand blaster. It's up to you to decide which of these moves he does is important to learn to punish in which ways. And in fact, the easy point, or rather the point system for the easy mode, is likely to give you that option. Just pick a move he does that you don't feel like you're used to or aren't punishing correctly, and take the points for punishing that. Whether it even be just his target combo or one of his more complex moves. Because they're all in here, and thankfully, they're almost all fairly rare. He spends a lot more time walking around in neutral, trying to get very small advantages, and using the V trigger. Of course, all of this is going to depend quite heavily on exactly how your inputs went. So let's take a look at that. Actually, better to do this on this background, I think, so we'll keep that. Unfortunately, as noted, his inputs are not simple, they're just easy to do, assuming you are good at holding a button on either your controller or your fight stick. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to hold two of them, so you can expect to be changing around buttons a lot. Let's change this to 2. And that's probably accurate, although I should probably move forward too. Alright, Luke, let's show it off. Still not good. There we are. It may be a little difficult to see at this point, but this input begins with a down-forward throw. If you're not familiar, you can use the button input 1 second delay, hold the correct direction, and then press the button. That will cause the button and the direction to be taken as the first input of the recording, even though you've been holding the direction the whole time. It is necessary to hold that throw through the entire input. So you may want to change it to a shoulder button if you are a controller user, or whatever is easiest to hold while pressing options to end the recording and hitting other buttons if you use hitbox or fight stick. From that down forward throw, hold forward, press in sequence heavy punch, medium, and then heavy kick. There's heavy punch, medium punch, heavy kick. All of this is happening while the throw animation is happening, so it's relatively fast. You then press up forward for a short time, then forward again, which is not absolutely necessary, and end the recording fairly quickly. If you've done it correctly, when it replays into itself, because you were holding the throw the entire time, the throw will only register the very first time it plays back, like this. And because of the game's input leniency, it's possible for various reasons to end up with a down forward and so on, causing him to do an uppercut. But this nearly never actually matters, because as you can see here, in order for this to happen, he has to complete the jump or complete the uppercut. If you poke him, he'll jump. most of the time and won't usually uppercut. You can purposely attempt to get this uppercut in there, but as you've seen already from the bot, it doesn't actually result in the uppercut itself happening all that often. So whether or not that is in there is not really important. This is mostly so that you can decide how difficult the ending of this recording is, because the first part is obviously fairly easy. Hold down forward, press and hold throw, tap 3 other buttons in sequence while holding forward. Getting the perfect up forward after that can be a little difficult, especially since you are aiming to get all of this done before the throw animation finishes. You can do this from close range in order to make it easier to get everything in without random buttons happening, but you're going to have to try it a couple of times probably. Fortunately, because it's such a simple input overall, you can retry input 1 for this bot basically whenever you want to, and it will occasionally change his rhythm and maybe you'll see something else you like. And of course you just leave it at whichever one feels the best for whatever character you're using. On to slot 2. Get this right. There we go. Again, a little difficult to see, but this is a down back throw plus medium kick, and again you have to hold the throw. It is okay for the medium kick to end up plinked, as you see here, but it is not okay for the medium kick to end up first, because that will mean that the throw is not registered on the first frame, and we need it to be. We're once again holding the button all the way through. After that, you will press a forward V trigger, a back medium kick, and then a half circle forward. The problem with this input is that if you do it from close enough, and you usually should, because it will help you get the timing correct, he will do a back throw. And a back throw for Luke changes sides. So here's a demonstration of that. Generally, you have to figure out when exactly to do this, because the medium kick needs to basically not come in until Luke switches sides. And the ending of this recording is relatively late, so you're holding it for a while without thinking about anything else. Holding the throw until the end will make sure that the medium kick is the only thing that occurs when it plays into itself. Same thing that happens when action 1 plays into action 2. Because you've held the throw, it will change what the actual first button of the input is. This one will need to be tried multiple times for most people as well. It is where he gets most of his walking, but the timing is quite difficult. Fortunately, it is another one where you can just leave it if you think it's basically okay and try it again another time, with the important and difficult part being the holding of the throw button for the entire length of the input. His recording 3 is a little simpler, because it doesn't involve holding any button except that last light kick that you see. However, it is a little bit difficult to hit the others perfectly on the first frame together. This is one where we suggest avoiding plinks as much as possible, because there are 2 different other inputs that hold the things that are important here. So you will need to press a medium kick along with your V trigger, i.e. heavy punch and heavy kick along with this medium kick. But this does not require a direction. In fact, it's good that it does not have one because of certain command normals. While that is animating, which is his hopping knee, you will want to input a back heavy kick so that the back heavy kick doesn't actually happen. or rather that you don't see it. Right after the back heavy kick, a forward light punch, and then the difficult part is the ender of down light kick, and you must hold this light kick. It's not really that hard compared to most things because you just end the recording immediately. There's nothing more to think about. But it is a little bit hard to test whether or not you held it because unlike the first two inputs, you can't just easily replay it by itself. You have to combine it with one of those and then watch fairly carefully. If you see any light punches in there that seem to be going with diagonals instead of just forward, then it's been done correctly and the light kick was held. But even this can be a little bit hard to see. There's the example now. You see the crouching light kick followed by a crouching light punch, which no one has ever hit specifically in this spot. It is just that the light kick being held cancels the light kick part of the throw input. This has a fairly lenient timing, so you don't have to worry about making sure anything happens very specifically. You can actually do this fairly slowly as well. The important thing is that the back heavy kick is hidden, and aside from that, you can probably get away with nearly anything. The fourth recording, however, is both quick and relatively difficult. This is a forward triple punch followed by a back throw. But this requires you to hold two different buttons and to hit the triple punch in a specific way that is somewhat difficult. However you set up your buttons to make this most effective for you, the idea is that you have to hold just the heavy punch and also hold that throw. Other than that, it's not terribly difficult input. The hardest part is pressing forward the heavy punch that you must hold, and only a heavy punch, along with a medium and light punch. You can actually use a triple punch button, but you also have the other light punch plus medium punch button available if you want to. Just make sure that you have a way to hold the heavy punch and hold the throw. In order to make this as simple as possible with the ending, you just do a quarter circle forward and end the recording while holding the other two. So you don't have to do a bunch of other complicated things or hit any more buttons once you've got those two held down. As you can see, if Luke has full meter, this results in him using his critical art. It also loops into itself, and you can see that it's done correctly because you will only see a forward medium punch. And since it's so fast, generally there's not much to worry about. His rhythm will change. Sometimes he will do that, and sometimes he will do that, and so on. It's a very useful and quick input. The reason he is able to do the EX version of Sandblaster has to do with negative edge things. Specifically the fact that two buttons are released at the end, and the Sandblaster works with the two that are released more so than with the one that is continued. I said that the wrong way around, actually. You're holding two buttons and they get released. The medium punch is the one that actually is released. So you're holding the main two the whole time. He will also do it when he's doing other things as well because of the same thing. But this is not a common move because of his rhythm. It's easier to see when you're combining it with this action, which is basically going the other way. This is difficult to start correctly though, similar to one of the others from before. Because this starts with down back, light kick, and medium punch. It's probably easiest to do this by pressing light kick and V skill, but you can also press a light kick, medium kick button and a medium punch button if you expect this is going to be easier for you. Then just press medium punch about 3 more times. The third one, as you see here, ends up being a down back one. It doesn't need to be. It's very slightly helpful, but in no way worth putting in the effort for, because this input is for him using his multi-hit medium punch target combo string. The quarter circle back that follows the other 2 or 3 medium punches is where most of the rest of it comes out. The main thing to do is to make sure that you are holding the medium punch at the end of it all. You can see here that ours gets the crouching medium punch in there, but again, this really isn't that required. It's helpful because it is one of his few pressure-y normals, but his flow does not really work out with it, so it doesn't matter. As long as you've made sure to hold the medium punch correctly, he will have a crouching medium kick to use for other things. His crouching medium kick, while it is for punishes, isn't necessarily something that we are trying to get a lot of combos out of. But the quarter circle back is there for this purpose, and when you see it combined with other things such as Action 3, you can get certain things from it. Four is also a good one because it sometimes lets him do charged moves. Specifically, he will be able to do his charged quarter circle back heavy punch attack, and some other interactions will happen as well, as mentioned before, releasing different things in different ways. The requirements for this are quite tight. And are often directly related to a different move or to a different input set. But now, let's go into why the bot is built the way it is. And change stage in the meantime. The main reason why this bot was built the way it was is related to having to confirm when you do successfully punish Luke. He is very mobile in various ways, and that mobility leads to difficulty gauging whether or not you should finish certain combos with certain characters.
Let's do it. I'm always ready for a fight.
To repeat, if we didn't mention it before, V-skill is 2, suppressor, V-trigger is 1. V-skill 1 will work, but it does change the bot's rhythm somewhat. So we're going to change some buttons and then demonstrate why Bison needs this capacity fairly heavily. Bison has a lot of combos that are very difficult to do fully, and quite a few of them that don't quite reach if you have things a little bit off. Luke is good at creating this little bit off scenario. This is usually not the case when he's just coming straight at you, but he does have many options, especially once his V-trigger is activated, to not do precisely that. You see it here, for example. I'm just going to walk forward a little bit, hit medium kick, or walk forward and then use the V-trigger. So we're not really referring to those moments where Luke has done a thing that has brought him very close. But you must be aware that this is also required for those moments where he does this, because sometimes he doesn't end up very close, and good players will quickly learn how to avoid that situation when they're fighting you. They will do the same sorts of moves, but various ways to make sure they don't end up quite in the same spot. When your character has relatively short range normals, especially to start their quicker punishes, it may be difficult to get things the way you want them to, or you may find yourself going for the confirm when the opponent technically has blocked. This is much more important when you have chosen to V-shift out of situations. Because once you have chosen to V-shift, the way you V-shift and the move you do after the V-shift is fairly heavily dependent on what Luke chose to do. But since Luke has so many moves that advance, you can't be absolutely sure how close Luke is to you at the end of your own V-shift. He does, however, tend to recover in time, so that even if you went for your own V-shift, he might be able to block it. V-shift break, that is. The bot will not do this a lot, but we felt it was not necessary to sacrifice anything to get that function in, because it's something you can just understand by experience. Especially if you fight other players that cause the same problem. So again, bearing in mind the point system given, you will get lots of chances to punish Luke, which is probably good because we're at the point where most people who are playing, especially those who use our bots, are still experienced enough that you just care about learning some punishes. And therefore it's good to be able to just get those punishes in fairly quickly. But the bot is built to also make sure the punishes can be difficult. And you can learn to pay attention to, is this actually going to be easy right now? Is this the range at which this punish is easy? So unlike our boxer bot, where you are doing the hit confirms on a relatively defensive opponent who doesn't move very much, Luke is a matter of doing it against a relatively offensive opponent that can be confusing because they move so much. You can also see it being demonstrated here that technically the better you are at dealing with Luke in neutral, rather than waiting for him to just come in and you do stuff, the more the bot's rhythm changes. Obviously it's not always going to be possible to avoid Luke just getting in your face, because that's the point of the character. But there are definitely going to be times where he's just going to wibble around in neutral a little bit, punch through your projectiles, for example. Or even sometimes move to a position and just defend, even if it's just for a moment. As well as stuff like that, whiffing an attack and then following it up with something, because the hurt box was not actually extended for all that long. Even if you haven't input Luke bot all that well, you'll find that he has one main rhythm. It might not be this one, but he'll have one main rhythm, and then a lot of little nuanced sub-attacks and abilities and behaviors. And those are what you are watching for. Those are what you are training yourself to learn how to deal with. All of the stuff that isn't just autopiloting through basic things. He's very good at making sure that you are messed up if you have poor autopilot. Whereas Nash, more so, teaches you what your autopilot is, but whether or not you're being punished for it isn't usually something that itself depends on Nash. In Luke's case, it usually depends on Luke. So you'll get moves like that, you'll get sometimes EX versions of even the tackle with the shoulder version. So while you do get lots of practice on punishing just the things you need to be able to punish really hard, you also have to deal with things like that. Sometimes it's because your timing is off, sometimes it's because Luke's spacing is good. Some people might need or want to put on frame data, but this might be difficult to actually pay attention to while you're fighting, and you might need to record it if you are using PlayStation, or just have recording on your PC. Interestingly, we don't really consider whiff punishes to be an important part of this bot at this time. There are definitely characters who can do it though, and who probably would want to deal with Luke by whiff punishing. The main thing though is that Luke players against that type of character, I feel like they're more likely to just use Sandblaster a lot and not actually hit buttons. But if you find yourself in that situation, feel free to make your point system, particularly the third one. Yes. You'll see when we put up the bot on the website. Just shift it to whiff punishing things Luke does instead of confirming your hit confirm style punishes. One important thing for yourself that the bot will definitely not teach you innately is that Luke's corner guard is quite good. And he doesn't really have to come forward toward you at all. So when you find yourself in the corner against this bot, understand that your job has just become easier because it's a bot. At the moment, there's, as always, no way to tell Luke that you are in the corner and therefore should stop doing specific things. You will, however, still experience those moments where you do still get tripped up by some change in rhythm he has, based on just that's a thing he does. Generally though, if you are in the corner, because Luke can't knock you back in the way that's required to get an advantage, and because the bot doesn't usually back off, the timing is usually going to be poor for Luke, aside from V shifting. To get the maximum amount of practice, that basically means just once you do hit the corner, just kind of sit there until he does something very punishable, and then do a big punish that will knock him back as far as possible. You can even use it as a short sort of practice of corner carry. He's also relatively weak to neutral jumps, but we're going to have to use a different character to show you that off. And he's generally only weak to these neutral jumps if he's attacking you. This is another reason why you might want to get the uppercut in the bot, but there are other ways that the uppercut will come out other than the initial method I showed, so understanding whether or not Luke is able to keep a certain character out and if they need to neutral jump mostly comes down to their tools of getting past projectiles, not stopping projectiles, specifically getting past them. So we're going with Karine because she has the option, but given the speed of the projectile, it's difficult enough that you wouldn't necessarily want to do it. Or at least you wouldn't want to risk it a lot. Kareen also has the very specific type of combos that you need to practice when facing Luke in general. The kind that if you know that you've hit it, you continue, and if you don't know that you've hit it, you probably should at least think about continuing anyway, but the better you get at watching whether or not you hit, the less damage you'll end up taking in random situations in neutral. You can already see here that because she's like that, the bot's rhythm changes again. While you can't say that Luke has mid-screen mix-ups, he definitely has some options for making people stand still by threatening with the projectile, and then using that space to get in to do what he wants. And while this is reactable, it depends a lot on the player and on their character. Similar to Nash, recognizing that you have a limitation personally in terms of skill by the number of correct punishes you can keep in mind comes up a lot with this bot, because he requires a lot of different punishes for max damage. This is partially why we just left the constant overhead in there. It's a good way to practice dealing with that overhead, and while it is very punishable, a lot of other stuff he does is much less so. Similarly, you have to worry even more, similar to how our birdie works, the more meter Luke has, and he tends to have a lot of it. If you are on the offensive, he's usually building up meter without much use of that meter. And he has a good rhythm for backing off quite a lot. As noted, if you've input things a certain way, especially that action 1, you'll probably get more jumps and less uppercuts, but in the end, it's not going to be that different, and you can just change it every time you use the bot if you want to. Characters like Kareen are also somewhat stressed by not really having evasive hurt bosses to work with in the first place. So she can't easily mess around in neutral. The Orochi and Tenko are risks, and therefore she ends up needing to neutral jump. But it's important not to neutral jump with a full intention, because often you'll get hit by something, or you'll whiff something in the air and therefore lose your capacity to block on landing. You'll know that, for example, Luke is already back to having meter. One of the hardest parts of this bot in terms of recording it is actually knowing whether or not he has all of his options. But so far from all our testing, it appears that as long as you have got the quarter circles correct, even if you nearly never see things like that overhead styled move he just did, he probably has it. His rhythm is just causing him to do other things. One of the most interesting things we found is that the better you are at actually anti-airing him when he does jump, the more likely it is that he's going to do other more interesting things. But that would involve getting him to the point where he jumps in the first place. All in all, therefore, don't play too defensively. Because if you do, chances are that the actual equivalent of a player of this character, realizing that you've started to play defensively, are just going to play defensively themselves, and they have more health than you. And much bigger damage. If you're not playing Lucia or Abigail, in terms of just raw damage, you probably can't outdo this character seriously. It takes too much of your own meter, too much effort, and you don't have the benefit of a V trigger that recharges while damage is being done. It is in fact that precise reason that makes us go that you should try to punish in this precise way. Once Luke has activated either V-trigger, your goal is to hit him to reduce it, usually as quickly as possible. Because he doesn't need to use it, and it doesn't actually wear out or go down all that quickly. So he can, much like Karine and other characters, sit on it for a fairly long time. The bot won't necessarily do this because the V trigger input is in there and you'll just get blasted at. But you'll notice that even if you block his moves, particularly specials, if you fail the punishes, he does get to keep some meter. And it's certainly enough to basically cover the amount of time he spent doing the move. As far as we can tell, that is close to how you can calculate that. So obviously, it's in your best interest to manage to land hits on Luke, even if it's just V-shift or V-shift break, as quickly as possible. In order to get your own V-shift meter for the V-shift related point system, you can mostly rely on your character's crush counters. Certain characters who don't have great crush counters usually will have some V skill available to them that will let them build up the meter for this. But even that is part of the matchup, because if you have moves that will let you build up V meter naturally, obviously your V skill is one and your crush counters are basically the other. These moves tend to be less safe to just throw out against Luke in many situations. But as all bots involve, having your health able to drop while you're trying to get the points, just taking damage in order to get enough V meter to do V shifts isn't necessarily great. Another reason this is important is because we found that there are many moves that Luke does within his specials anyway, where the interaction with V-Shift is not obvious. So learning this and being able to execute the right move at the right time out of your V-Shift to actually hit him has an additional layer of complexity. For example, if he actually does the V-trigger version of Sandblaster and you V-shift it, especially if you V-shift it at the beginning, you tend to V-shift twice depending on the range you're at, and other strange things happen. But now let's move on to demonstrating the main final important thing here. Someone attempting to do this with a character that they don't have all the combos ready for.
I'm always ready for a fight.
This is a perfect example of what happens when you have a character that you don't play that often. You know their combo theory, but you don't necessarily have the amount of practice required to do all of the combos when in these situations. And this is even for a character like Ibuki who has a target combo available for situations like Luke being close. Because dropping your combos against an aggressive character leads to this. Characters of this type also tend to have weaker mid-range stuff, so you'll often find yourself trying to hit someone and being ever so slightly off. Basically, normally someone would just play a longer range character, keep Luke out with their longer kicks or punches or projectiles. Ibuki can only do this to a certain extent. She has options, but Luke might just punch his way literally through some of those options. So understanding both your timing and your spacing comes up a lot. Even more importantly, is something that results from that. When you have put yourself in a situation where the character can't be punished with your quickest move at close, or at relatively longer range, I should say, what exactly do you do? Do you hit a longer move hoping that they didn't do anything? Or do you find some other way to get out of the pressure situation that is probably going to come up? This is talking about a situation where the opponent knows that they aren't advantaged truly. They did something that was unsafe, but they are at the spacing that makes it safer. And this is this place where many people make a decision outright. Am I doing things here, or am I just going to let you hit whatever button you want and hope that you hit a button that doesn't, like, stress me out? You're going to see this a lot in Luke play as a generality, because while the bot does not do it quite as often, players using V skill 2 are definitely going to put themselves in situations where the thing that they need to do is defend. And you'll be thinking to yourself, well, I should just throw you since you should need to defend now. You'll at least have to tech the throw. Luke is the character that breaks that rule. And he doesn't necessarily get himself in that much danger for doing it either. Whereas characters with throw invincible moves usually don't have the best recovery on those moves. Luke's both evades the throw and just hits you without necessarily having a big downside to it. It's there, but it's nowhere near the same as light uppercut for those who have throw invincible uppercuts, for example. In fact, the rhythm of Luke Bot versus Ibuki is currently showing off the main thing we needed to show. You'll notice that he blocks a lot of this. That isn't all unfamiliarity either, that's partially just changes in rhythm. And of course, making sure that we got his CA in there to occasionally just make your life miserable. The recovery of his specials is generally fast enough that if you don't whiff punish them when he whiffs them, you're going to be in some trouble. So once again, if you think that's a point system that you're interested in that makes a difference to you, when we do release the bot, please check which one you should substitute based on what character. We'll have suggestions at least. But of course, do whatever suits you best for your own practice. At the moment we do have minor bits more testing to do, but it's generally gone really well and we did get to devote a lot more time to this bot from core concepts than we usually do, since most of what you see online for this character is just Lucia style, I'm converting into incredibly large damage right now with all my resources and you are just going to have to die. So there isn't a lot of specific mix-up style stress that we needed to put in. The few things that we did need to get in aren't terribly hard and he basically already has them, they're just rare. Some inputs of the bot may not have them all, but again, they're the type of situation where your opponent has control already. It is going to be a guess. It's not meant to be confusing, but then you could survive it if you understood it. It's a legitimate mix-up, so it's not as necessary for the bot to have it. And that means we're likely to have the bot released at the normal time on our Sunday, 7 PM Eastern, or a little later than that, sometimes 6, if everything goes really well. Given the complexity of the bot, we don't feel as if it's a good idea to put out a prototype tweet thread, as it's likely to just result in confusing things. And we're already at Friday, so You can use this stream as reference, and if you didn't get all of it based on what I said, you should be able to find any clarifications necessary on our website 2-mk.org/Luke-bot. Or of course you can just go to the bots page and navigate to LukeBot from there. Again, this is a Sunday release. This is not something that is already up. Other information on our streams, such as our Monday mishmashing battle lounges and other things that we are likely to be starting up soon given that it is the end of the year, can be found at our Twitter 2_MK_FGC. And of course you can contact us there or through the contact page on our website 2-mk.org with any questions about this stream or bots in general or pretty much anything. Since this is supposedly the last character of Street Fighter V, you will probably not be seeing any more bot releases unless we come up with a secondary version of this one for this game. You can look out for other releases of bots, presumably for Melty Blood. But for now, this has been Rillian along with Just Fine and Kansuki Dynasty for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.